Welcome to the Numerologist Podcast, where we bring you a very special guest every single week to help guide you on your spiritual journey, live with abundance, and inspire your soul.
Hi, Numerologist community. Welcome back to another episode of the Numerologist Podcast. So happy to have you with us once again. Now, today we have Roy with us again, and we're going to be talking about another numerology topic. And this one is kind of a bit of a lead on from what we spoke about with Roy last time. So last time we talked about the life cycle numbers, and this time we're going to be talking about the pinnacle numbers. So firstly, welcome.
Hi.
And I actually
everybody.
think I just got that wrong. So it's not pinnacle numbers, right? It's the pinnacle.
Yeah, it's the pinnacles. I don't know why they chose the name that they chose when these were discovered back in the early 20th century, but it's a good appropriate name because a pinnacle is like a height, like the top of a thing. Actually, the technical definition of a pinnacle are those pointed spires that sit on the top of columns of like churches and universities. You know how very often one will be built with four towers. The pinnacle is the thing that goes on top of the tower.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, the very highest point. And that's sort of supposed to be an idea of what the pinnacles are like. In other words, they're sort of like the high point of that period of time, you see, the number that expresses that period of time best. And I like using the pinnacles, even though they don't explain what they are or what they're about that much in the numerology books. They just tell you how to calculate them and say this number is this and that number is that. But actually, when you think your way through, they become very effective system of working with numerology because they use the entire life path, the whole set of numbers, and they bridge from one to another, and they also have very distinct qualities that are important to everybody, okay? But first, before we start talking about all of that, about what they are and what they offer us, I want to talk about the calculation.
Yeah.
The calculation is really simple, really simple. What you do is that you take the life path number and reduce it to a single digit, okay? In other words, if you have an 11 life path, then it becomes a 2. If you have a 22 life path, it becomes a 4. There's a reason for reducing them like this that way, because the way you get the first pinnacle, the time of the first pinnacle, is that you subtract that from 36, okay? So say, for instance, you have a person who's a life path of 8. You subtract the 8 from 36, and you come up with, I was waiting for your answer, 28.
Sorry. It's rather early in the morning here, and my my math skills aren't the best at the best of times.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I wake up having sort of a geometric hypnagogic images, because of the stuff I study. I'm like watching a sacred geometry hallucination, then I realize, hey, this isn't a dream, I'm waking up. But anyway.
More on that a different day, I think.
So what you do is that you take the 36, which is 4 cycles of 9 in a person's life. You remove the life path number from it. So if a person has a life path number of 5, that means the first pinnacle ends at 31, okay, at age 31, because 36 minus 5 is 31, right? Then the next pinnacle goes for 9 years, and the pinnacle following that one goes for 9 more years, okay? And after that, we're into the last pinnacle, which lasts for the rest of the lifetime, okay? Now, one thing to note is that people with lower life path numbers take longer to reach the second pinnacle than those with the larger life path numbers, like 8, 9, so on and so forth. That's just simply the mechanics of the system. In other words, if a person has a life path number of 2, okay, then, and that applies to 11s and 22s as well. If a life path number is like 2, you're only subtracting 2 from the 36, which means they don't get to the second pinnacle until age 34, as opposed to someone who has a life path number of 9. You subtract the 9 from the 36 and they start theirs at 27, okay? And the reason is kind of because of the experience of people with these different life paths. A person with 1, for instance, a 1 life path struggles a lot and works really hard to achieve what they want to achieve. And sometimes they'll change their mind about what it is they want to achieve in their life. And then by the time they get to 35, they begin to settle in, as long as 1 isn't the second pinnacle number, which can be kind of volatile. But, it's like this is the way we work the ages. So now we have all 4 ages set, okay? The first life path number, the first pinnacle, is a life path taken away from 36. The second and third life paths are 9 numbers each, and the last one is goes for the rest of the lifetime. Okay. Now we'll talk about let's talk about the names next. I was going to talk about the meanings of the different numbers first, but let's talk about their names first. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Well, the first pinnacle. I think I'm going to bundle these 2 together. I'm feeling a little adventurous today. Okay? So the first pinnacle is called the pinnacle of attainment. This is exactly the same number as the achievement number, reduced to a number between 1 and 9. Okay. Now, first we reduce the month, day, and year numbers so that each one is a number between 1 and 9. The first pinnacle value is found by adding together the month and day, which is the same result as the achievement number. Now, it's also possible to do this in such a way that you'll get an 11. Well, that 11 can remain as the number. It's just a little bit more advanced method of interpretation. But the achievement number is the number we're going to be discussing next week. It's like one of the most important numbers in the chart because it tells about the experiences of the younger years up to, usually in the late teens or 20s, in which a person gains most of their experience in life. The achievement number stays around for the whole life, but the actual experiences one has under that first pinnacle are the experiences that build their character and personality. Okay. Now, like, let's say a person has an achievement number of 5, like they were born on March the 2nd or March the 11th in your case, or somebody's case that I know.
Yeah, no, that's me. Good memory.
Yeah, the 5, is one in which a young person has a lot of life experience when they're young. They experience more than a lot of people, except for maybe 9s, during their early years, teenage years, so on and so forth. And it's perfectly the way we describe the first pinnacle, okay? Perfectly the way we describe the first pinnacle. So when you see the name written as Pinnacle of Attainment, it's the attainment of that personality, the development of the various complexes and fears and hopes and so on and so forth that a person settles into adult life with. All right. And like I said, it's very interesting, but the people with the earlier achievement numbers tend to come to the end of their first pinnacles later in life. And that's very interesting because it'll show you someone who has an achievement number of not one, for instance, like they were born on September the 1st or something like that, really hasn't decided what it is they really want to do with themselves until they get to age 35. Okay, and get used to all the things that happen under the achievement number. It's quite an interesting thing. I know it from experience with people of all numbers that this is one that really is a take it to the bank prediction. You're sitting doing a reading with someone. Okay, now the second pinnacle, okay, is the sum of the day and the year numbers. So, for instance, a person born in 1982 has a year number of, 1982 is like a 1. Okay, so this would be a year number of 1. All right, the way I get that is that I think fast and usually group them into two number groups. You know, the first one is 19, that's a 1. And 8 is 9, and 2 makes it 11, 2. Okay. So a person born in 1982 has a year number of 1. So if we go back to our date and we add the birthday number to this number, to the 1, then we come up with the number of the second pinnacle. This is called the pinnacle of obligation, okay, and represents a period of 9 years in which the person is busy at their career trying to make it, climb the ladder to success. You know, if they're working in the corporate world, it's one thing. If they're in business for themselves, they're doing stuff like construction contracting or something like that, this is where they're proving themselves to their customers, to the world, to their clients, and so on and so forth. This is when an artist or musician usually has their greatest successes if they last that long. You know, there's that curse of rock and roll thing that seems to have terminated a lot of popular artists in the 1960s or early 70s or something, like Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and them. They call that, what was it? And even Bruce Lee, you know, died, I think he was 33 years old, 32 or 33 years old. But like all these people were dying back in those days. And of course, the conspiracy theorists made it into a thing of like, if you're really successful and or having a really good career, then your life won't last very long. You know? But at any rate, the second pinnacle is the value of the day and the year. Okay, we bring them down into their reduced form and add them together. And this tells the story of that very productive period of life in which a person is more or less obligated to prove themselves or fulfill their obligations to society. Okay, and that age depends on the 9 years that start from the beginning of the second pinnacle. So in other words, if the person's achievement number was a 2 and they started at 34, this would be from 34 to 43. You see what I mean? 9 years. Okay. Now, third pinnacle is the sum of the first 2 pinnacle values, and it lasts for another 9 years. Okay, this is called the pinnacle of foundation. Some numerologists consider this the most important of the 4 pinnacles because this is where you build the foundation for the rest of your life. In other words, this is when people have really gotten serious and are putting all their energy into, you know, building a nest egg for the future, for their retirement. Maybe they have children who are coming of age during this time and they start to have grandchildren, you know, to build out the family, to extend it outwards, or they decide to move from an apartment, from living in the city, into building a home in the suburbs. You know, that, all these sorts of things are what happens if a person's been a valiant knight all this period of time. It's in the third pinnacle that he becomes the king and sets up his legacy or dynasty or whatever. This is the kind of thing that the third pinnacle is about. It's called the pinnacle of foundation. Now, let's say a person had a one achievement number, and they had the 2 year number. Okay, what we're looking for is that, or the 2, or the 3, I think I used in the example for the person born in 1982 was the 1 birthday number. Okay, let's just say for example's sake that the numbers of 1 and 2 we're adding together. That would mean that the third pinnacle would be a 3. In other words, the first pinnacle value is the value of the achievement number. The second pinnacle value is the sum of the birthday number and the year number, the birth year number, okay? And so the third pinnacle value is the combination of these two. And the first pinnacle value is the sum of the number that we haven't used yet, the 2 numbers that we haven't used in the sum yet from the life path, and that's the month number and the year number, okay? And this is called the pinnacle, and boy do I hate this name. It's called the pinnacle of retrospection. I don't like the name because nobody uses that word, and when they do use it, they immediately think they use it as if it meant the same thing as hindsight. For instance, in the life path cycles, they call it the harvest cycle. That's a good name for it because it accumulates all the benefits and joys and sorrows, etc., from the first 2 cycles. Well, in this one, you're doing the same thing. You're going to be doing the same thing. In other words, this is the accumulation and the sorting out of your life experience. You're not going backwards to do it. It's just what happens during that time, in a person's life experience. Now, when you say retrospecting, it's always like retrospection. To me, it's always like, well, in retrospect, I would say that blah, 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 which is fine if you're going over your life lessons. But you talk to somebody's grandpa and ask them when was the last time they would sat down and went over their life lessons. They're going, what are you talking about? It's just a poor choice of words, but I guess it fit for those people back in the late Victorian and Edwardian era of the early 20th century. Maybe it meant more to them, and we should change it at some point in the future. And at any rate, so we have these 4 pinnacles, and we have an idea of those meanings of what the names are for them. But let's just put it like this. In the first pinnacle, you build up the character, the personality that you bring to adult life. The second period, you work to fulfill the obligations of the role that you have chosen in adult life. The third pinnacle, you build the foundation for the rest of your life. And in the fourth pinnacle, you live the rest of your life. And this is exactly what the pinnacles are. And they're so easy to calculate. I usually do them mentally, but before I did them mentally, I used to do them on paper napkins in a restaurant, or a piece of the back of a receipt or something that I happen to have in my wallet if the person didn't happen to be carrying a notebook, because they're so easy to remember. How do you put it? Month and day, and then the day and year, and then the sum of those two, and then the month and year. Boom, that's it. Those are pinnacles. Okay. Well, I hope I haven't confused you too much.
No, I think that that little summary was actually quite good, because I as you've been talking, I've been frantically scrolling down, my numbers, and like having a look at those things as well. So when we first started talking about this, you mentioned that you had some tricks and tips that you could help us understand our pinnacles better. can we talk about them now?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Let's see. Let me think for a second about how to break these down. Okay. But at any rate, the best way to go about interpreting these is to really think about what they're doing. We should take a look at some of the things like this. Okay. If one of the pinnacles agrees with the life path number, that period of life is going to be very steady. The ups and downs will be like hills instead of mountains. Troubles will be easier to solve unless they're things that you consciously accepted as your fate, or, in other words, a lot of it has to do with the attitude. The life path is the vibration that you're most familiar with and the one you work with the most in your life. So if you've got a good grip and handle on what that is, what opportunities it offers you, and what your opportunities usually work out for you the easiest, then one that's a pinnacle that's in agreement with the life path, okay, will be very easy. And sometimes this doesn't even mean that it has to be the same number of the life path. Sometimes it can mean that it's a number that just agrees with the life path by nature, what I called a friend or a frenemy of that number. Like, for instance, if a person has a life path number of 8, and or let's use a better example. Say a person has a life path number of 7, and they get a pinnacle of 3. 3 is the best number for 7 because it forces them outside of themselves. 7s tend to withdraw and live a life that's kind of private. Worst case scenario, they become loners. The guys you see wearing the black jeans and hoodies and sitting in the corner by themselves, okay? That's the worst case scenario of a 7. But the 3 brings them out. The 3 makes them more social, and it's a very good number. So it's considered a very agreeable number to 7. So if the person is having a 3 pinnacle, and their life path is 7, then this is going to be a very smooth period. Things will sort of balance out. And if you look at it, a lot of these numbers, the way we, something that a lot of people don't know is that if you look at the numbers from 1 to 9, 5 is in exactly the middle. And you almost always are in agreement with the numbers that are on the same distance from either side. In other words, in one direction from the 5, we have 6 and then 7. And from the other direction, we have 4 and then 3. And they match really well, just like 6 and 4 match really well. But these are agreements. And like I said, I've got a whole talk about that called Friends and Frenemies that we're going to be doing about how a standard compatibility is like an illusion, and this is really about what is important for each of the numbers, okay? But that's for the future. This is now, all right? Now, if one of the pinnacles agrees with your birthday number, you'll find it easy to focus on and act on what's important for success in whatever you're doing. During that time, opportunities will come to help you build your inner strength. So let's say a person has a birthday number of 4, and their third pinnacle happens to be a 4, or happens to be a 6, then that would turn out to be a very powerful pinnacle for them, because when a 4 gets focused on something, they won't let go. They will do it until it's done. And since the third pinnacle is building up for the future, is creating the future, then that 4 will end up having exactly what they want, as long as they're willing to put in the effort. You see what I mean? So this is the 4 in the 6th period, and that's a good trick to use. The pinnacle that agrees with the birthday number. In fact, if it's even the same as the birthday number, it'll tend to be easier than when it comes as a double number in other places, because sometimes the double numbers mean too much, of that particular energy. Like in the personal years, it's very common to see something happen like a person finds out there are 4, and you mention, well, this was a 4 personal year, and they say, oh yeah, that was like the worst year of my life. You'll find that happens a lot. And it's simply because it's too much of that one number. You know what I mean? But with the pinnacles, it's a little bit different, because these pinnacles are like opportunities. And if a person is focused on capitalizing on the opportunities, then it turns out to be one of the best years ever. Okay. In other words, the opportunities just come one right after another, and they're not in such short succession that they make things difficult for them. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
Now, yeah, and if one of them agrees with the soul urge or the heart's desire, which I think is the most important of the name numbers, and it is, in my opinion, opportunities will present themselves that can move you forward toward fulfilling your deepest desires, which is a big subject in itself, because most people don't even know what they want. What their deepest desires are. I mean, they know that what people expect of them, and they know what will make them look cool or feel cool, in the eyes of others, or what society has presented to them as being their best option, to live a happy life and so on. But this may or may not be the same as the desires that the soul urge wants to fulfill. You see, that's why they call it that. That's also why they call it the heart's desire, because it's something that's really deep within. And we'll talk more about that when we're doing name numbers. But if one of the pinnacles agrees with the soul urge, just put a big, huge green light on there and work toward fulfilling what your true, or toward finding out what your true desires are. And there's even an easy exercise for that. You make a list of things that you want, and things that you really, really, really want. I don't mean things like, a box of toothpicks. I mean things that you really, really want in life. And you just go through the list, and when you write it out, you'll start getting the feeling like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't really that important. Oh, wait a minute, I can go get one of those next time I'm at the store. This isn't a shopping list. You know what I mean? It's so once you come to the place where you've got a list like that you really believe to be something that's a true heart's desire, a really deep desire. And these can be things as well as things like, well, it needs to be specific. I mean, if you just say, I want love, that's kind of general, It's like you want to be specific about, do you want a solid relationship? Do you want to have a candy bar that they just made called a love bar? What is it that you mean by that? What do you mean by that? But anyway, and you start working with this little list, and you can laminate it or put it in a little booklet or something like that, or something that you carry with you that's sturdy, and you look at it every chance you get. You go through that list every chance you get. And the trick to making it work right is you don't tell anybody about the list or what you're doing with it. In other words, it's like joining the Fight Club. Okay, you don't tell anyone about.
I love
Fight
that
Club.
analogy.
Yeah, but at any rate, it comes from an old book from the 1930s, a little pamphlet on success, by a guy who was one of the most successful salesmen in America. And you can use this technique to help yourself look for those deep desires that you have within you, what you want to be, the person you imagine yourself as in the future, is that really who you want to be in the future, or do you want it to be something completely different? And of course, be realistic about it. I mean, at my age, and even though I'm in fairly good physical condition, I'm not going to win the Boston Marathon or become a mass astronaut or something like that, but it's about being realistic about who you are and what you want to do. Well, anyway, let's move on. Let's get another one of these, because I'll be going over that subject in great depth when we get to the soul urge. Okay.
Yep.
Now, if one of the pinnacles agrees with your expression number, then your choices and decisions about what you want in the future, or where you want the future to go, will generally be correct. And I don't mean choices and decisions about what kind of hamburger you want. I mean, when you're things like you're looking for a car, and you see this really neat little two-seater that looks just perfect for you. Oh, this is just what I want. And then all of a sudden, your spouse comes home and says, guess what? We got a job in the right next door to the most beautiful national park in the whole country, and blah, blah, blah. And you realize, like, oh boy, I should have bought an SUV. That won't happen if you have a pinnacle that agrees exactly with your expression number. Okay, so say, for instance, your expression is 3. If you get a 3 pinnacle, most of the big decisions you make during that period of time, and even some of the small ones, you might find yourself suddenly obsessed to go out and buy a parka, and find out that the next year somebody invites you to a ski vacation, and it'll be the first time you've ever worn it. Things like that happen with these agreements between the numbers. Okay. If one of the pinnacles agrees with the major life challenge, it's going to be an intense period. But if you work hard to achieve the objective that the challenge represents, then you will uplift all the numbers in your chart. And when I say uplift the numbers, I think I mentioned this before when we talked about the life challenges. The uplift is that all the numbers carry both negative and positive characteristics, okay, to use that form of language. The default is to tend to go towards the negative characteristics, because those are generally the easiest for human beings to work with, all right? And a lot of people uplift their chart by doing things like meditation, spiritual retreats, yoga, Tai Chi, all these kind of things that imply the growth of wisdom and so on and so forth, that imply a closer connection with the soul urge, you see? But the challenges, that's what nature gives us to balance the chart, to balance the whole chart. In other words, by overcoming the challenge, you uplift all the numbers in your chart so that you're getting more of the positive qualities of those numbers, and the negative ones seem to start fading away. And this even has to do with things like depression, and may even have to do with allergies and so on. I've heard miraculous stories about people spontaneously overcoming allergies because they got in touch with their inner selves and lost a fear of something, which is what this allergy was expressing in the physical life. But at any rate, and that's another subject too. Okay, now during the second and third pinnacles, the 5th year after the pinnacle begins is likely to bring a pivotal kind of event or some kind of major change, depending on the number of the pinnacles. In other words, if you're having a 6th pinnacle in your 3rd year, if the 3rd pinnacle has number 6 as its a value, then the 5th year of those 9 years is likely to bring something like a major change of residence, okay, or the purchase of a home, or something of that nature, something having to do with the domestic life, takes a radical turn of events. Okay, and this happens if especially true. This is especially true if the number of the pinnacles happens to be the same as the person's year number that's active then during that 5th year. That one's a little complicated, so let me go over it again. When we have 9 years, 5 is in the center, and 5 represents change anyway, so it often means a change of direction of the way that number is working. Okay, it doesn't matter which one of the pinnacles it is, it's the year that we're talking about, the 5th year. Now, if the 5th year, looking at it from personal years, happens to be the same number as the pinnacle, then you can be almost guaranteed you're going to get that kind of turnaround. In other words, if the 5th year of the cycle of the 9 years happens to be a 6 in the case before, you can predict that the person's going to move, buy a new home, something's going to happen to radically change the environment in which they live. You can take that prediction to the bank. It will happen. Okay. And one thing to know about the pinnacles is that whereas we gauge the life path cycles by the personal years, which begin at the beginning of the calendar year, the pinnacles change on the birthday. Okay, so in other words, if you're coming to the end of your first pinnacle, it won't be January the 1st of your X year, it'll be your so-and-so birthday. In other words, a person that has 5, that means you go into their, has 5 as the life path, they will go into their second pinnacle on their 31st birthday. You see what I mean? They always change on the birthday. That's why they work so well together with the name numbers, who, the dynamic alphabet changes on the birthday's year at the same time. So we get a good way of seeing how the pinnacles and the name numbers fit together. The way of doing that with the life path cycles is a little bit contrived, but with the pinnacles, it works beautifully. Okay, 3rd pinnacle lays the foundation for the remainder of the life. As I said before, this is really important. Never forget that. A lot of people think that there are, how do you put it, that all of the pinnacles are of the same importance, but if you look at the first being the character building, the development of the various issues that people carry with them, being the creation of the personality and character, and the fact that there are 16 achievement numbers and not just 9, and this sort of thing, it's what shows the variance in these pinnacles. And the achievement number can be the same on any life path, but that 3rd pinnacle, the one that's the sum of the first, the one that is the month and year numbers added together, is the one that lays a foundation for the remainder of the life. And if a person is born with a high number, like say for instance 9, okay, their first pinnacle is over at age 27, then we have 2 more 9 years, which would be 36 and 45. At 45 years old, they're going into this last period, which means that between 36 and 45, they're going to be laying the foundation for what happens from 45 for the rest of their lifetime. Okay, maybe in the future when we're half machine and half human, you'll have to stretch that out a little bit because we'll live for 200 years, unless we have termination dates built into our implants.
Oh, well, they'll definitely have to have a kill switch, right?
Like in the sci-fi movies.
Yeah.
I just saw one recently that was really good about that, about how people were trading off years. They had figured out a way to hack the system and were trading years. So if you wanted somebody to do you a really big favor, instead of paying them off a bunch of money, you paid some extra years onto their lifetime.
Oh, gosh.
But
it's all good when you've got a lot of years ahead of you. But anyway, that is definitely a story for another day.
Yeah. Well, that's why this is so important. This third period is so important. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So the third period is so important, just like the first period is so important. That one builds your personality, but the third period, the first builds your personality, the third builds your future. Okay.
So I've got all of my pinnacle numbers written down now. So can we talk about like what do they mean?
Sure.
Let's talk about how numbers manifest, the numbers themselves and how they manifest through the pinnacles. What do each one of my pinnacle numbers mean for me?
Well, you mean yours specifically?
No,
just in general?
Just in general,
Okay.
but I'm going to apply everything you say to my own.
Okay. Well, the easiest way to do this, of course, when you're analyzing pinnacles in personal years, it's really important to look at them within the context of like the life path number, what the achievement number is, what the life path cycles that they're formed under are about, in order to get some background information. And without doing that, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to talk about specifics of each of the four pinnacles or how these numbers work out in each of the four pinnacles, okay? But what I did was that I made up a little list of the 9 numbers, and the most general way you can express their nature, during any of the four pinnacles. Okay. For instance, the 1 means individualism. This is when the person is in the process of creating themselves through their interaction with the world around them. Okay. And that's going to be what happens whether the person is 8 or 80. It'll work the same way in all the pinnacles. And also achievement. In other words, a person is driven to achieve something, whatever it is, whether they want to become the best finger painter in kindergarten, or whether they're competing for the top salesman of the year at a major corporation. It's this idea of achievement that's like a driving force for them if they have a pinnacle with the number 1. Okay. 2 generally has to do with cooperation and alliances. Okay, we know from the nature of 2 that it's the teamwork number, the team players number, and so on and so forth. And very often it's about building up alliances. And this is especially important in that third pinnacle when you're working toward the future, because if you have a 2 number, the people that you befriend and surround yourself with are the people that you'll probably be with for a very long period of time, well into the future. So choose wisely. All I have to say. Third one is about self-expression. Okay, it's also said to be pleasant, number. In other words, a 3 pinnacle is generally considered to be pleasant, but they also say it's about self-expression. In other words, this is when a person really is not so much a determination, but the opportunity to express oneself really means something during this period of time. Okay. Generally, it's an enjoyable period, though, and that's where a lot of the self-expression comes in. A person who's not a rock star or something like that will probably be spending more time with their friends and ranting about what goes on at work, or people in the news, or whatever people rant about nowadays, and so on and so forth. Okay, 4. The 4 has to do with organization, with getting oneself organized, with accomplishing things. And when I say accomplishment, what I mean is that 4 is a number that wants to get stuff done. Maybe a little stubborn during that period of time, or a little frustrated with people trying to interfere with their processes and so on. But if 4 is a pinnacle number, it's definitely this urge to accomplish something that's driving it, driving that desire or that project or hobby or whatever it is they find themselves doing. It's also about organization. This organization is something that's very useful for them both at work and at home. I don't mean that the person all of a sudden gets a case of OCD, okay? But I do mean that the person thinks about making life better by simplifying what goes on around them. And that's the drive to simplify, to organize, to make things solid, having things in the right place, and so on and so forth. Okay, 5. Now, this is the pinnacle of change and freedom. Now, freedom is a funny kind of thing because it carries a lot of responsibility with it. Okay, a person can be responsible with the freedom they have, or they can be irresponsible and become what's the word for it, commitment phobic, and so on and so forth. They don't want to stick with anything because it starts interfering with what they perceive to be their freedom. But the only real freedom comes from, how do I put it, self-discipline. And the reason I say that is because self-discipline leads to freedom from worry, freedom from from the fear of the unexpected, and so on and so forth, because you know what to do, you know what you're capable of, and so on and so forth, because you trained yourself in that way. And this is an opportunity that 5 can bring, as well as change. And of course, every change brings some kind of opportunity with it. And once a person knows how to look within that change and find the opportunity and drag it out of there, then it certainly does fulfill the promise of this pinnacle, or the opportunity of this pinnacle. So 5 can be among the best of all pinnacles, as long as a person has the discipline to stay on the path that they have chosen, and to accept their own adaptability, the adaptability that's given to them during a 5 pinnacle. 4s sometimes have a difficult time. People who have say for instance, a life path of 4, or a achievement number of 4, when they go into that second pinnacle, if it's a 5, they have some degree of trouble because they want things to stay as they are, and they'll try to force this sense of change and freedom to adopt to them instead of adopting to the changes around them. And that can be very difficult for some people, especially people in businesses that aren't keeping up with the times. Let's think of it that way. Or businesses who are too far ahead of the times and won't compromise and scale their work back a little bit. You see, this is for inside of a 5 pinnacle. It can be challenging. All right. 6 has to do with duties, responsibility, and success to a great degree. 6 is a very powerful number in terms of success because it tends to bring opportunities from other people. Okay, it also gives a strong sense of responsibility. A person will usually live up to their word and do what they're supposed to, and sometimes not do what they're not supposed to because they're sympathetic to what the person that asked them to do it. But generally, that's what this has to do with one's life duties and responsibility. A 6 coming in that third period, in that third pinnacle, is a, like a blessing, from above. Because if the person has been fairly good at living their life in terms of living to achieve what they want out of life, what their long-term plans are, if they come with a 6 in the third period, it will definitely root them in a foundational mode. In other words, they know they're building towards the future and they won't stop. Okay. The 7 has to do with wisdom and knowledge. Now, I often give this example when I'm talking about 7 to people who are thinking that the 7, this is the spiritual number, this is the magic number. 7 can be part of anyone's life. Some of the best athletes, some of the best musicians, and some of the best lawyers in the world are 7s. And the reason is because 7 is the bridge between the everyday realm and the hidden realm. And the person seems to have that kind of blessing as long as they know how to tune into it. So there's wisdom and knowledge connected with the 7. This knowledge is like the knowledge of breakthrough knowledge and discoveries and talent for invention or creating new ad slogans or something like that. So the period of 7 can be very beautiful for anyone unless they take that period of 7 and try to use it to run the rat race out there and climb the corporate ladder and stuff like that. This is a period where miracles are more likely to happen. I often associate 7 with being the number of the law of success, outside of being the number of our laws, which basically designed to work on the basis of moral authority that has been derived through human history and experience and religion and so on and so forth. This is, law, but law really is the natural law. 8 has to do with material achievements and accomplishment. Okay, now this material success doesn't just mean a whole lot of money. It means comfort. It means security. It means establishing yourself in a way that your authority has risen to a great height. Okay. It also means sharing this with someone else. In other words, a person with, I think it was Napoleon Hill that made a big point in his books like Think and Grow Rich and so on and so forth, that nobody is really successful without their work, their products, their knowledge, something like that, being shared with other people. A successful company is a person who hires a lot of employees and treats them well. In other words, they become responsible for a lot of lives, but there are also a lot of people who thank that person, because he's given them a good job, or she's given them an opportunity to take care of all their responsibilities. This is what material success is. Material success is the success of, somebody once said, happiness is getting what you want, but success is wanting what you get. In other words, a person who's grateful for their lives because it's exactly what nurtures them and what takes care of them, is a person who has nothing to complain about. That's the 8. That's how the 8 can work. Okay. Of course, it has to do with money too, because money's a part of that. I mean, let's face it, this is the world. The world is expensive. But at any rate, the 9 often has to do with greatness, because the 9 is the biggest of the 9 numbers, and it encompasses all the characteristics of all the other numbers. And you'll find 9s who accidentally achieve some kind of greatness in their lives or are known for something really big and important that affects the lives of a lot of people. You also find a lot of nines who aspire to that greatness, but by using certain types of means, they end up in trouble for it. And then I think there was a line in Harry Potter where the wand master tells Harry, he mentioned something about someone achieving great things. And he didn't mean good things necessarily, but great. In other words, it was a big deal what they did, whether they did good or bad. And also 9 is the number of completion. So it means that the person is pretty much focused on who they are, what they are. They've completed themselves and they like to bring an end to things. That doesn't mean that they're a killer, but it does mean that they're the kind of person who comes in and finishes the job. The completion of a product, for instance, is when it goes out to market, when you let it go, out to market, and then it has its effect on the world and brings you the returns that it does, according to the kind of effect that you put out into the world. So it's also a number of completion. Now, all of these are things that will definitely be themes underlying any of the 4 pinnacles, okay? As far as the more accurate analysis of these pinnacles are concerned, the various things can modify it, as I mentioned before, like life path cycles, life path itself, and the achievement number. For instance, a person can have an achievement number of 33. When we use it for the calculations, we reduce it to 6, but that 33 must be considered in looking at the pinnacles. You see what I mean? And not just be considered as a 6, but be considered as the 33, the person who's the teacher, who's willing to sacrifice anything in order to do the right thing, and so on and so forth. So we have people, born on dates like March 30th, April 29th, and so on, that get this 33 achievement number. And it's a tough path, but it's important to know that these numbers 33, 22, and even the karmic numbers like 14 and 16 will affect the way that pinnacle operates. You see what I mean? It's like the 16, for instance, is a 7, okay? But if it carries that karmic number 16, that means that if one of their pinnacles is a 7, they will tend to want to look behind the curtain and see what's going on under the surface of life, but they may not do it. Their experience may have taught them to be more practical in their outlook and in their way of doing things. So what ends up happening is that 7 automatically carries the meaning of you need to cultivate your intuition, and this is definitely a 100% given if a person has that particular achievement number and this and a 7 pinnacle comes along. Okay, and I mean, I've seen hundreds of examples of the way these things work out, but these basic guidelines for the pinnacles are something that can be followed. In other words, this is the starting point from the bottom. In other words, when you're picking the pinnacles, you're sort of picking your shoes, okay? But you want to make sure that they're that they go with the rest of the outfit. You see? You see?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, there is so much to learn about the pinnacles, and I think we might need to wrap up now because we've been talking about these for a little while. But where can we get more information about what they might bring and working with other aspects of the chart?
Well, I think that the best thing to do is to get a numerology chart podcast because, those of us who work for Numerologist.com are doing the best to bring you the most clear and accurate interpretations that we can possibly do. Okay. And sources for other consistent and accurate writings are hard to find, and we can always refer you to some of the rarer odd books that have some good stuff in them at some point in the future. But I think these are really important, and the best place to get information about the Pinnacles is to take these basic ideas and go over what the previous Pinnacle was like and what you learned from it, what you experienced during those times, and trying to associate those experiences with the theme. You'll see certain stuff in there, and from other things about the numbers, you can pick it up. In other words, I think that there is no better teacher of numerology than one's life experiences, okay? So, as a matter of fact, I've used life experience to correct people's horoscope when their birth time is inaccurate, and it's a lot of people, believe me. But they're pretty much the same way. The Pinnacles, I believe, are like the foundation and the structure of the chart, of the life path chart, and they're about the experiences that come your way, as opposed to your responses and effects. Those mostly come from the name numbers. And the Pinnacles are much closer to Earth, so to speak, than the experiences we get from the life path cycles and so on. So that makes them easier to work with. And, you want to talk about interpretation of Pinnacles, these can be divided down into yearly Pinnacles, 4 Pinnacles per year, or 4 Pinnacles a month, or 4 Pinnacles a day. Even, but that's a little bit of a different subject.
Yeah,
I think we need to close up now.
Yeah, I think I would be constantly doing calculations if I was doing it 4 Pinnacles a day. That would be intense. But it is funny. It is funny to sort of know that your life is kind of you can break them up into these 4 different sections, right?
Yeah, yeah. It makes for a good system of categorizing opportunities, I guess you could say. In other words, each of these numbers is an opportunity. Each of the numbers on the life path, all of the numbers come from the birthday, are all opportunities. Okay. In other words, a 5 comes. This might give you the opportunity to do something you've never done before. Is it a good opportunity? Is it a bad number opportunity? Is it something that you really need in life? Those kind of things can be answered by the name numbers, by the soul urge and the personality number, because they're the ones who determine what your real goals are and so on and so forth. So they sort of work together from deep within and from outside in the world. They sort of work together to meet up and make up different possibilities in your life, because they're all potentials. They're never, it's never fate. It's never the kind of thing where the gods have decreed that you live this way, because, and it's proven by, that's the best way people could explain it back in those days. But we understand what they are now. These are opportunities. Just like your DNA is not an opportunity, but living in a house with a gym in it is an opportunity to get the best out of that DNA with some resistance and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again, Roy. We're going to wrap up there. And I just want to make sure our numerologist community knows that they can head over to numerologist.com to read our blog and read a whole range of other, articles and information about numerology. I'll actually put some links in the show notes to some blogs there that you might find interesting that are related to this. And also make sure you subscribe to this podcast if you're enjoying it. Subscribing helps us, reach more people with these podcasts, which is all we're trying to do, really. So thank you once again, Roy, and we'll be speaking next time about the achievement number, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's like my favorite number. And yeah, okay. All right. Well, I'll be happy to talk to you then. 2 weeks, same time, same channel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Numerologist community. I hope you really enjoyed this podcast on Numerologist's YouTube channel. You can head to the link in the description if you want to listen to this on iTunes or Google Podcasts, and you can subscribe there too. If you love this video and want to see more, make sure you subscribe to our channel as well.